There are photographs that no one should have taken. One of them was found in a collapsed barn outside a town that no longer exists on most maps. The print had melted into the damp wood, its corners eaten by mold, but what survived showed enough. A porch, a line of faces, 11 of them, some blurred, some too sharp, the eyes all wrong, too close together, like they were placed by someone guessing at the design of a human face from memory. A little girl in front holds a doll with its head turned backward, her own mouth slack and open, as if something was crawling out of her throat when the shutter caught her. The date written in fading ink, 1891. The place, Black Hollow, Virginia. The family's name doesn't appear on census records anymore. The last entry was scratched out in the 1940s, a thin black line across a name that once carried property, lineage, and a kind of pride. Before the line was drawn, before the fires and the sickness, they had lived in that hollow for 2 centuries. 10 generations, each more tightly bound to the next, until there were no outsiders left to bring new blood. The same faces repeating themselves in smaller, weaker forms. Bones remembering the shape of a curse. Locals used to say the hills around Black Hollow whispered at night, that if you stood where the old house used to be, you could hear children murmuring through the soil, as though the ground itself was trying to confess what it had swallowed. The elders warned travelers not to follow the sound of voices after dark, not to look too closely at the lights moving between the trees. But warnings rot, the way memory does, and soon the story turned into a myth that no one believed, until someone found the photograph. The image was sent to a university archive for preservation. The archivist who handled it resigned a week later, leaving behind only a note. Their eyes don't belong to this century. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because somewhere, as you read this, the hills of Appalachia are still keeping their secrets, still breathing, still remembering the family that tried to outlast human biology itself, and nearly succeeded. The town that once surrounded Black Hollow was called Marin's Rest. Founded in 1783 by settlers from the Carolinas, it began as a logging outpost. A few cabins pressed against the mountainside, their chimneys coughing smoke into an air so still it seemed afraid to move. By 1800, Marin's Rest had become a closed world. The river that led there silted over. The trails vanished under thickets that grew like barricades. The families who remained did not leave, not for markets, not for marriages. They planted crops, buried their dead, and began marrying the only people left, each other. The first record of the bloodline that would later become legend appears in the diary of a preacher who passed through the hollow in 1829. He wrote of a peculiar settlement of pale children, all resembling one another, as if copied from a single face. He baptized 3 infants that day, all bearing the same surname Halpern. That name would echo through a century of births, deaths, and disappearances, until it lost all meaning except within the family itself. By the time the Civil War reached Virginia, the Halperns had retreated fully into isolation. They stopped sending letters. They stopped answering knocks. When soldiers rode into Marin's Rest in 1863, they found the church roof caved in, the pews buried in dust, and the graveyard overgrown. But the Halpern home, a sprawling timber structure that leaned like a tired beast, still smoked from its chimney. Someone was living there. What began as kinship had become confinement. Cousins marrying cousins, uncles to nieces. Blood winding around itself in ever tighter loops. The family tree didn't branch anymore. It circled, a noose of names tightening through generations. But to them, it wasn't sin. It was survival. There were no strangers left to marry, no new faces to bring into the fold. The mountain was both their protector and their prison, and the children born there began to show the price of that protection. A midwife recorded her observations in 1882, describing infants with flattened noses, misshapen limbs, and eyes too pale to belong to healthy stock. She delivered 16 children before vanishing herself. Her notes later found in a trunk beneath the house where she'd last worked. In one entry, she'd written a single sentence unlike the rest. "The child knows my name before I speak it." The family believed those births were signs, proof that their blood carried something ancient, something chosen. But the world beyond the hollow had begun to call it by another name. The first strange child was born in the winter of 1894. A season so cold the creeks froze solid and the mountain itself seemed to stop breathing. Her name was Lila. Though the family rarely spoke it aloud, she was the 9th child born to Ruth Halpern and her husband, Elias, who was also her mother's brother's son. The birth was long and silent, no cries, no blood, just the slow emergence of a pale infant with eyes the color of ash water. Her skin, thin as parchment, revealed the faint blue web of veins beneath, pulsing too quickly, like something was trying to escape. Lila did not weep as a baby should. She watched. Her gaze unsettled even the elders, who whispered that she looked too much like the portrait hanging above the mantel. Elias's grandmother, drawn before the war, with the same unblinking stare. By the time Lila could walk, she did so in perfect circles, over and over, her small footprints tracing loops into the dirt until the pattern sank deep enough to collect rain. The others avoided her. Animals did too. The family's dogs refused to enter her room, and once, a horse that caught her reflection in a trove reared back, so violently it shattered its own leg. Ruth said Lila was touched by God. Elias said nothing at all. He worked the fields and dug shallow pits in the woods, where he buried things no one asked about. By 7, Lila had begun drawing on the walls with charcoal, sketches of faces that no one recognized. Some were twisted, some almost human. One night, her mother found her tracing the outline of a figure with too many arms, whispering a name she swore she'd never heard before. When asked where she learned it, Lila only said, "From the bones under the floor." Her neighbors, what few remained, started to talk. They said the Halpern girl was a witch, that she carried the punishment for generations of sin in her blood. Others said she was proof that the Halperns had broken something in themselves that could never be repaired. Yet none dared confront them. No one walked the path to that house after dusk. And so Lila grew. Each year, her resemblance to her ancestors deepened until it seemed the mountain itself was recycling faces, returning the same blood in different skin. By 12, her hair had turned the same lifeless silver as the old family matriarchs in the portrait. By 13, her voice had begun to split, sometimes speaking in tones that sounded like several people at once. The family started locking her room at night, but the scratches on the door in the morning suggested it hadn't mattered. When spring came, the mountain thawed, but inside the Halpern home the air stayed cold. The locks on Lila's door grew heavier. Ruth prayed until her lips bled, whispering hymns between sobs, her voice shaking with something that sounded less like faith and more like apology. Elias, once a broad man of the soil, had gone thin, haunted. He said the girl dreamt in languages no one taught her, that she spoke to people who'd been dead 100 years. At night, the family began to hear things, soft murmurs under the floorboards, where Lila had once said the bones slept. Sometimes, they said, the house moved. The beams creaked in rhythm, like the entire structure was breathing. Chickens stopped laying. Cows birthed calves with twisted spines. When the midwife's replacement came, she lasted 1 week before fleeing, leaving behind a note nailed to the barn door. It's not the girl that's wrong. It's the blood. Leela wandered the woods alone. Hunters would find her standing by the old family graves, tracing the names carved into the stone with trembling fingers. Once, she was seen burying small bundles wrapped in cloth. No one knew what they were, but the smell that rose from the ground afterward made even the dogs whine. When asked what she was doing, she only said, feeding them. That summer, she began carving symbols into the trees. Circles within circles, always closing in on themselves. When the wind passed through, those carvings seemed to hum. Elias tried to cut one down, but his axe slipped and split his thigh open to the bone. The wound blackened within days. He died before the week was done. His body twisted, his mouth frozen in what the preacher later called a look of terrible recognition. At the funeral, Leela didn't cry. She stood over the grave, humming softly, the same tune the family used to sing during weddings generations before. That night, Ruth locked herself in her room. By morning, she was gone. The bed was soaked, but there was no body, just the faint smell of rot, and a trail of muddy footprints leading down into the cellar. After that, the family stopped speaking her name altogether. But the neighbors said they still saw her, or something shaped like her, walking the ridge at night. They said she'd grown tall and strange, her limbs too long, her eyes reflective like an animal's. And when she turned toward the valley, the wind carried a sound that was not a scream, nor a song, but something in between, a sound that didn't belong in this world. By the turn of the century, Merrin's Rest had emptied. The last families fled down river, leaving their homes to the moss and mist. They said the mountain had gone wrong, that it hummed at night, that no light ever lasted there. Only the Halpern house remained, a decaying skeleton at the edge of the hollow, windows black, its chimneys long cold. Yet smoke was seen rising from them still, every few months, as if someone, or something, remembered how. The county sent men once, in 1906, a census team. They never came back. The report filed afterward was strange. The paper unsigned, the writing unsteady. It mentioned only a single sentence before the ink trailed off into nothing. There is a girl here who remembers every name ever spoken on this land. For years after, no one dared approach Black Hollow. The woods grew over the paths. The river turned dark with silt, and the Halpern name passed into rumor. A caution whispered around firesides, a ghost story meant to keep children from wandering too deep. But history, like blood, has a way of circling back. In 1932, a prospector named Emmett Lorne stumbled upon Merrin's Rest while mapping coal seams for the mining company. He said he found the place untouched, as if time had simply stopped. Inside the Halpern home, the air was thick with dust and silence. Every chair still stood in place. The table was set for dinner, plates arranged, forks aligned, but the food had long rotted to black crusts. He swore he saw a shape at the far end of the hall, a woman, thin and grey, her hair trailing down her back like cobwebs. She moved without sound. When she turned toward him, he saw that her eyes had no color, only the reflection of his own face staring back. He fled the house, but when he reached the tree line, he realized something followed him. Not footsteps, but a sound. A quiet knocking. Always 3 beats at a time, echoing from somewhere deep within the woods. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing near the old river bend. When a search party found him days later, he was still alive, but barely coherent. Before dying of fever that winter, Emmett repeated one thing over and over. The circle never broke. She's still in there, and she's waiting for blood that remembers her name. Locals began calling the place the hollow that breathes. They said at night, if you stood near the tree line, you could hear whispering beneath the soil, voices murmuring through the roots, all speaking the same name, Lila. But Lila had been born in 1894. She should have been long dead. And yet, witnesses swore that sometimes, on moonless nights, they'd see a figure in the fields, small, barefoot, walking perfect circles in the dirt. In the autumn of 1974, after nearly 70 silent years, Black Hollow appeared again on county maps. A university anthropology team from Charlottesville had begun cataloging abandoned settlements in Appalachia. Forgotten towns, swallowed by the hills, victims of disease, famine, or isolation. Merrin's Rest was listed as one of them. The records said no one had lived there since 1906. But when the team, 4 graduate students and 1 professor, arrived, they found signs that someone had. The first thing they noticed was the air. It didn't smell like rot or age. It smelled alive, damp, metallic, faintly sweet, as though the forest itself was exhaling. The trees leaned inward, their trunks warped, their roots threading the ground like veins. Even the birds refused to sing there. They reached the Halpin house by dusk. It stood crooked, but intact, its wood blackened with pitch, the windows clouded. Someone had carved circles into every doorframe, deep grooves, layered, worn smooth by time. One student, Clara Vance, noted that the pattern matched old Appalachian warding symbols, meant to keep something in, not out. Inside, everything was as Emmett Lorne had described. The table still set, chairs in place, dishes fossilized in decay, but there was something new, a candle half burnt, resting in a bowl of water on the mantel. It was fresh, wax still warm. They decided to camp inside. That first night, they recorded strange readings, electromagnetic pulses that came in rhythmic intervals, every 12 minutes, like a heartbeat under the ground. The house itself seemed to respond. Floorboards expanded and contracted in perfect rhythm. A low creaking sound that carried through the walls. At 2:13 a.m., the recorder captured a voice. Not speech, but a whisper. Drawn out and trembling, she's still walking. The next morning, they found their supplies moved. Nothing stolen, only rearranged. Their notebooks stacked neatly by the door. The professor's watch stopped at exactly 213. By the third night, Clara refused to sleep inside. She'd seen something from the upstairs window. A girl, barefoot, standing in the overgrown field, tracing circles in the grass. When she called out, the figure turned, and Clara said her own voice echoed back. But from the girl's mouth. They left at dawn. Only 3 made it back to the highway. The 4th, Michael Grant, was found 2 days later at the edge of the river. His eyes clouded, his skin pale as chalk. His last words before dying of shock, "It's not a haunting, it's inheritance." After that, the state sealed off the site. No official report was ever released. But the university quietly withdrew all funding for the project and erased Merrin's Rest from its archives. Still, stories leaked. People hiking near the ridge said they heard knocking under their feet, 3 beats, repeating. And sometimes, in the fog, they swore they saw a girl moving just ahead, always tracing circles, barefoot, her hair silver and still wet with dew. In the winter of 1990, the state sent one last team into Black Hollow. Not academics this time, investigators. the kind who carried shovels, cameras, and sidearms. Their assignment was simple: locate the remains of the missing university researchers from 1974 and determine if Merrin's Rest was safe for reclamation. The locals warned them not to go after dark. The sheriff, a man who'd lived near the ridge all his life, told them something stranger: that the mountain didn't want to be mapped anymore. He said, "The ground up there remembers where it's been touched. Every footprint, every grave. It never forgets." The team ignored him. They reached the site just before a snowstorm rolled in. The Halpern house still stood, sagging under the weight of decades, its roof laced with ice. The air was unnaturally still. Even the wind seemed to stop at the threshold. They began their excavation in the cellar, the same place where Ruth Halpern had vanished nearly a century before. Beneath layers of stone and ash, they found wooden boards stained dark with age. When they pried them up, the smell hit first, not rot, but iron, wet earth and something older. Something wrong. Underneath, they discovered a pit. It was circular, perfectly circular. Inside were bones, hundreds of them, arranged in spirals, small and delicate, layered like rings of a tree. Infant skulls, long femurs, spines too fragile to belong to adults. And in the center, wrapped in what had once been cloth, lay a figure preserved by the colder girl. Her hair silver gray, her face serene, eyes closed, as if asleep. One investigator, Officer Merrin, a descendant of the same family that founded the town, reached down to touch her wrist. Her eyes opened. The camera footage ends there, but the final report, never released publicly, was leaked decades later. It described what the remaining officers claimed they saw in the seconds before the feed went black. The house began to breathe, the walls pulsed like lungs, and the ground, the earth itself, started to move in circles beneath their feet. They fled. Only one man made it down the mountain. He was found wandering the roadside barefoot, muttering a single phrase, over and over. The blood never left. It only turned inward. When rescue crews returned days later, there was no sign of the others. The house was gone, swallowed into the earth. In its place, the snow had melted in a perfect ring 30 feet wide. Inside that circle, the soil was warm. Today, no map lists Merrin's Rest. The county records say the area is uninhabitable, prone to sinkholes, unsafe for entry. But hunters still tell stories. They say sometimes, in the fog, you'll see a girl standing in the fields, barefoot and calm, turning slow circles in the dirt. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear her humming the same wedding tune the Halperns sang generations ago, the same song they buried their dead to. And though her eyes are pale and her voice is soft, she isn't calling for help. She's calling you home. End of story.